So, good afternoon, and thanks very much for joining our Sustainable X, Unlocking Sustainable Supply Chain Challenges. Very complex topic and very short time to talk about it. So we'll kick off. Just a little introduction to us. I'm Rhonda Allen. We are part of Sustainable X, and we are a sustainability consultancy, and we really anchor on and focus on businesses making good business decisions around their sustainability strategy and leading with the business case for sustainability.
Yep, I'm Nick Riley, and Ronnie and I both come from different sectoral and industry backgrounds, so hopefully we've got a pretty broad perspective on lots of different supply chains and their challenges.
So in the next 30 minutes, which is really a short time, we are going to talk about the strategies for long-term change in supply chain, best practices and trends and things we're seeing in the market, and most importantly, how to actually measure your progress.
So just before we get into the nuts and bolts of the supply chain side of things, it's always important, and we always touch on the business case for being more sustainable. It's all well and good, everyone saying be green, be more sustainable, add more social value, but why? If you don't have a big driver for this, the chances are it's going to come and go and fall off the radar and you won't keep the focus. So the biggest one we bump into by far is the customer piece. It's customer pressure. They are asking your organization, particularly in the business-to-business supply chain, what are you doing? Or are you on this framework? Or have you got these credentials? Then cost, particularly since the energy crisis kicked in, has become a bigger deal. If you apply a sustainability lens to your business and do it well, you can reduce costs. It can be a lever that works both ways. Cost and carbon can come down. And then compliance. So there is regulation. Until last week, it was coming at 2030, and now it seems to have moved out a little bit, but it is coming. And then there's social pressure, which comes with these things again. There's also competitive advantage, because if you're perceived to be the most sustainable in your sector, that is attractive to some customers. So that can be a thing. Investors are also interested in this as well. So you will attract a different group of investors and potentially not attract other investors, depending on what your environmental, social, and governance or sustainability credentials are. And then there's a right thing to do driver for it as well, which some people have, which is great, but actually most people take action because of the former. Whilst they do have a conscience, it's hard to bring it to the top of the list without a business case. So moving on then, what's the role of supply chain in this whole mix of things? And it's pretty major. It depends on the type of organization that you are, and if you're attending this, it's probably likely a big deal for your organization. It's a big part of people's spend. It's a big part of their value chain, and there's lots of things happening there that are outside your direct control, and that's what makes it so tough. So this sort of things can happen. Bad things can happen in supply chains. Good things happen as well, but there's human rights issues all the way through. And we're talking your tier 1 suppliers, your tier 2, even tier 3. Stuff can happen and it can come back to haunt you. There's also what we call biodiversity abuses, but it's actually just degrading natural resources at an unsustainable rate. If that's happening in your supply chain, is there a sustainable way to do it? And then there's the consequences of your product, if you like, the waste that is generated in production, but also post-production, when you've actually sold it to the customer and it ultimately gets disposed of, what's going into the environment from that. And increasingly, you've got this extended producer responsibility, which as supply chain owners, you're responsible for increasingly. And then there's this Dyson example, health and safety issues, particularly applicable to mining and things like that. So you've got lots of raw materials coming in. There is risk of human rights abuses and health and safety abuses in that supply and production. And the final point within there is this concept of greenwashing. And fundamentally, greenwashing, you've made a claim, you haven't got any evidence to back it up. And good practice in this is to actually have evidence and data. So if you're stating something, you're saying, here's where we are now. Objectively, we measure it this way. Here's where we want to be. Objectively, we measure it this way. And this is what we're doing to get there. Then you are bulletproof. No one can accuse you of greenwashing. But as soon as you start saying we have a green supply chain, or we've got super sustainable suppliers, if you've got no evidence on deck, you're on dodgy ground.
So what do you do with this? And I've had 20 years of experience in international supply chains, and it's really, really tough. And supply chain is a tough gig. And but some of the strategies, and I've got a high awareness of and interest in what companies are doing in terms of strategically managing their supply chains, including sustainability. There's some really key things, back to basics of what they need to do. You need to understand your supply chain. What does sustainability mean for your business? Which framework are you going to apply? Where are your impacts? Because that completely changes depending on what industry or sector you're in. You need to look at the definition. What do you want to measure? What are your targets? What industry? What standard in your industry? What's going to be aligned to your customers and your competitors? This is and what are your stakeholders? And as Nick mentioned earlier, investors really care. So what do the investors care about? In terms of measurement, have you started measuring? Really good practice is to have a measure, even if it might not look as rosy as you like today. Start to measure and build a baseline, even if it's it's going to degrade a little bit because you've got some changes in your business. Start to measure. It's best practice in the sustainability space. Set a target. There's lots of ambitions. Targets and ambitions go hand in hand, but it is important to set some targets and have a North Star, not just for your investors, but for your aligned to your customers, but also for your internal people. They need to know which direction they're heading and what are the important goals for your business. That helps create progress, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And really mature businesses start to communicate these things. They communicate the good, bad, and the ugly. They have stories to evidence what they're doing, measures, and best practices, as I said, targets. So in terms of best practices and trends, there's a lot going on here, and it's a really active and busy space. But we just wanted to share, in everything we've seen and what we've read and clients we've worked on, there's 14 key elements for a mature, sustainable supply chain. So long-term goals, as we said, all the supply chain targets and business targets, there's long-term goals. So 5 years or 10 years, something that you can aim for as a business. People understand their multi-tier supply chain. It's as Nick mentioned earlier, there's risk all the way through the supply chain down to all your many tiers. You have a named person, a responsible person. Collaboration is key. We'll talk about some of these in detail. You understand your global position. Training and education is a key part of sustainability. We really it's one of the sustainable development goals all by itself, but training and educating people all along the supply chain within your workforce, and even training your board and your investors, is a really significant step forward. Having a strategy. Innovation, there's lots of innovation, lots going on in terms of creative things all the way along, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Digitalization, there's stuff coming out all the time, but also regulations are requiring traceability in terms of digitalization. So we need to be on the front foot in terms of sustainable supply chains. Understanding your scope 3, you need to understand your scope 3, but you also need to understand your carbon footprint as a business, because you're the scope 3 for somebody else. You have an optimized network. So much of the carbon footprint sits in supply chain. So as much as you can optimize that, the better. Minimizing resource use. Supply chain people are trying to do that all the time. This is new. Another new way to look at or angle on supply chain. The regulations are also accelerating in this space, but understanding your climate risk. And that's a whole nother probably webinar on that, in line with TCFD and the investor risk piece. And the circularity, but there's a lot there. There's 14 big topics. We are just going to highlight and spend a few more minutes on 4 of them today, because we've only got half an hour. So in terms of knowing your multi-tier suppliers, 90% of carbon footprint sits in supply chain. And so that's not just your tier one, but all the way through to your tier two and tier three or more supply chain. But only 15% of chief procurement officers actually have any visibility. This is really challenging for supply chain, but it's also challenging from a sustainability space because you need to de-risk and you need to understand what's going on. There's so many different ways you can do this, and this is quite, there's so many tools and support out there. If you're interested in delving into this is a dashboard from a business that we work with, and you can de-risk, you can understand where there's deforestation or they're using palm oil or not. Absolutely fantastic RAG ratings on where your supply chain is. So there's very detailed tools with a bit of effort and a bit of cost as well, but lots of technology there to support mapping your supply chain. We really like this one as a really simple, if something you're starting on, this is a really nice mapping that I think it's Nudie Jeans, and you can have a look at their sustainability report. It's really great. They're a really cutting edge, but they go through, I think it is theirs, but they go through mapping all their supply chain, and you could do this in a workshop in your organization. What we take from the earth, what we make, what we break, and meeting human needs, and it does sort of map all the sustainability elements of every piece of their program. And so in terms of mapping your process and your supply chain, this might be one way to do it on a big whiteboard or with some post-it notes, but keeping it simple might be a good strategy to start with. What do best in class do to accelerate and work through? They always target the first tier because it's easier. But one thing that we see businesses doing is, if you're having a meeting within supply chain, normally the purchasing people might talk to the salespeople of the other organisation, and the language they use and their ambitions, their targets, and their understanding might be completely different. So maybe change who you're meeting with in the organisation, purchasing to purchasing, because you'll all be on the same page in terms of who you ambitions, targets, and you'll understand your same language. And another thing we do see is organisations with multi-tier supply chains have a preferred supplier program. So you align your goals. Nestle's doing this really well, and they're aligning their first and second tier supply chains, and they're giving them incentives to get to renewable energy and all the big targets for them to reduce their carbon as a big multinational, and training incentives. So there's lots of different things that can be done in terms of multi-tier, but it's definitely the first place to look.
Okay, so the people aspect of this is key to the execution, if you like. So it starts at the top, and this is not something that you have additional goals and targets for. We like to see it built into your existing management regime. So within the senior leadership team, it's important that someone there has this portfolio. They are responsible for sustainability as they are responsible for other aspects of your supply chain, but that's definitively spelled out. And then they're responsible for setting and communicating to the board what your objectives and targets are on sustainability. If they're in a board meeting, there should be some targets and information in there. And this should then cascade through your organization, just like everybody else has got goals and productivity, etc., and improvement targets. They should have some of these things added in. And it might not be specifically identified as being a sustainability thing. It doesn't matter, as long as it's in there and you're executing it as an organization. And it can be a driver and should be within R&D. If you have that as a function, it should be a consideration they have. And from a good governance perspective, on every agenda, you should consider, should we have some aspects of sustainability as a consideration in there? In procurement decisions, should we have some aspect of sustainability in our procurement decisions, so that everybody's got it in there, just as business as usual? And then as you get into the suppliers, it starts off with a sort of soft audit questionnaire-based approach, but then you need to start getting in for your critical suppliers and the bulk of the spend in your supply chain. You kind of need to see what's happening on the site. And particularly if you've got overseas operations, you might need to personally do it, because there are organizations like the SEDXs and the EcoVadis's and the BSIs that will do that for you. But boots on the ground is key to authentic auditing of your suppliers.
So collaboration, my favorite saying is you can't lift a heavy table from one corner. So I think it's really important, and there's a great story, and Big and Mighty is a fantastic story from Unilever in 2007, where Big and Mighty wanted to it was the first story of concentrated laundry detergent, and they didn't want to sell their product in a tiny pack because it looked like a lesser product on shelf. So they collaborated with the whole industry. They collaborated with the big retailers like Walmart in America. That everybody saved money, everybody saved transportation, everybody saved water, and everybody aligned at the same time in 2007. So that was the start of the concentrated market, and it's a big business case that they study, and it was a win-win for all, and we're seeing that more and more come along. So these collaboration stories are really powerful. Something, if you're not aligned to, not joined in, there's a non-profit organization called the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. It's really interesting, and it's really great. They're an international organization. They're all around sustainability, and just worth knowing is they do lock out consultants. So I can't go to all the meetings, but they do lock us out because they want industry sectors. There's pharma, industry, manufacturing, electronics. I mean, there's lots of different sectors. There's lots of different chapters. It's worth taking a look. And one of the really great things on there is, because it's an agnostic service, they do offer, it's all free to join. There's so many resources, and there's also a whole marketplace for any sort of technology that you might want to investigate. So just take a look. It's free to sign up, and it might be something that you can collaborate with others. And there's a lot of big players on there, the AstraZenecas of the world, and they share of the events I've been to. They share a lot of information because we're all trying to work on this challenge together.
So circular economy, and when you look at, you might not be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but government-led targets. One of those, there's 17 goals, and one of those is resource consumption and responsibility around that. And a big area of this is the circular economy, which is one person's waste is someone else's input product, pretty much. So educating yourselves around that. There's some great resources on that. There's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There's somewhere you can look for guidance on it. But knowing what it is, and then thinking about what are your product inputs, what are your waste outputs, what's your ultimate product waste outputs, and could they have a home somewhere else? Might they even have value? And then engaging with those suppliers and moving it forward. And we love the rubber shoe waste as an example. So there was a manufacturer in Northampton who took excess rubber from third parties and used them as the input material for their rubber soles on the shoes. And they reduced their virgin rubber consumption by something like 80%.
And they cost.
In a year. Yeah. I mean, massive. They had to invest a little bit in some material to process that rubber as it came in, but it has paid for itself in a year, and now they're absolutely laughing. Kellogg's have a relationship with Seven Brothers, who's a brewer. So one of their waste products goes as an input product to Seven Brothers, and previously that just went to landfill and was a proper waste output. So there's some fantastic examples of cost savings and environmental benefits going together. Beautiful, where everybody's a winner. So we touched on a few different aspects of it, but early on we talked a lot about targets and measurements and data and putting it out there. And there are lots of frameworks and the procurement resource Rondi mentioned that will guide you as to what are the things you might measure. Inevitably, there's too much. There's just too much to go at. You can't do everything at once. So you do have to start somewhere, and you do have to cherry pick. How would you go through that prioritization process? A big, obvious and good place to start is what's important to your customers, and that can help drive it. What's everybody else in your industry doing? And if there are regulations coming, and when you look at some of the frameworks out there, so we use the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI is one thing, and they have some sector specific guidance. There's all sorts of other bodies. Get in touch if you want to know who they are, who have guidance that are specific to different sectors. Tends to be the bigger polluting sectors, but there is stuff out there, so do look around. And then ultimately, you've got hopefully a stakeholder map or an understanding of who all your stakeholders are: customers, investors, suppliers, internal staff. What do they think your priorities are? And when you go around those houses, quite quickly from a long list, you get to, all right, okay, obviously these are the places we should put the most attention, or maybe where we start this year. So as you go through that process, data is a massive thing, and getting the data which informs where you want to go. To have a target and be able to measure it, you need the data, and within supply chain it can be really complex. But the good news is, I'm sure you're all aware of it, the technology just gets better and better and better. One of the challenges, there's so much of it out there. What's the right technology and the right fit for your organization? But with AI coming in as well, the ability to take large amounts of data and process it is just increasing all the time. So we've seen a number of customers who put quite a lot of work into invest in the technology, which unlocks the data, and it's given them productivity benefits, it's given them carbon saving benefits. There's lots of benefits coming out of it. It's not just about the productivity alone anymore. So just looking at potential metrics, I mentioned the GRI standards before. When you look at these are frequently occurring things we see in supply chain. So around your resource usage is a big area. The labor practice, the human resources risks in your supply chain, the human rights rather. And then the final bit being the diversity, inclusion, and corruption side of things. There's an awful lot of social issues in there as well as the resource. And again, in those metric areas, in an ideal world, if you haven't got a metric already, try and work to a standard that's out there. So you're creating something that's going to be useful and comparable to other people in the future. But if you've already got data, brilliant, just use that. Just get started. Don't get hung up on the format of your metrics. Just get the metrics out there. The fundamental data is the same.
So there's no doubt about it. The supply chain stuff is tricky. But I suppose we're all not designing and launching new car brands. So yeah, it probably was exceptionally tricky for him, but it is also one of my favorite supply chain quotes. Very quickly, 1 minute on what we do at Sustainable X. We support businesses on their sustainability in terms of the education. We assess strengths, impacts, and opportunities. We develop strengths and plans and help businesses implement that with clear KPIs and accountability. So we have a range of products ranging from the training at the beginning down to supporting you getting the right team and everywhere in the middle. We've worked with over 200 businesses, all sorts of businesses and all sorts of industries. It's a fantastic, fascinating and interesting space. And we work with a lot of partners as well, because we also know we can't do it all. So we have lots of partners, and we're really proud that we're a multi-award winning business. Our clients say that we've demystified sustainability and accelerated their progress. So we'd love you to stay in touch. Before we've got a bit of time for questions, but we do have an ongoing webinar series with a couple more on the last Friday of every month. We're running a new topic. So that's on Eventbrite or LinkedIn. We have a Sustainable X website, which has lots of resources. We put a blog out every 2 weeks, and lots of resources already there. You can download for free, a bi-weekly newsletter, which you can sign up to on our website. And please follow us on LinkedIn. We have an active LinkedIn page and a monthly newsletter that's got different content again. So that's us. Thank you very much. Please get in touch if you have any questions, or if there's any questions from the room, we can take them in the chat.
I think people can speak as well, can they?
Oh, can you speak? I don't know.
We haven't done this on Teams before, so
this is the new Teams. So I will stop recording. But we're very happy to stay here and